almost harmless, in the wide observation window of the Coalition command ship. Earth floated quietly in the darkness, covered in blue oceans and white clouds. Soft sunlight touched its surface, making it glow like a marble. It did not look like the home of a dangerous species. It did not look like a world that had frightened half the galaxy. Commander Erix stood with his hands behind his back, staring at it for a long time. He had seen many planets before. Some were covered in storms, some were burning hot, some were filled with giant machines and heavy defenses. Those worlds looked threatening. This one did not. It looked peaceful, too peaceful behind it. The command room hummed softly with machines. The screens floated in the air, showing maps, signals, and streams of translated data. Officers moved quietly, speaking in low voices. Everyone knew this mission was important, but to Erix it still felt unnecessary. On the central table, several files were open. Old recordings, old reports, old warnings, all of them about humans. He tapped one of the screens, and another message began to play. A distorted voice from another civilization filled the room. It sounded tired and nervous. Do not engage them directly. They do not behave like other species. They fight even when logic says they should surrender. The recording ended with static. Erix sighed. He had heard this one many times. There were dozens like it. Every nearby system that had ever interacted with humans had sent similar messages. Not formal reports, not clean scientific analysis. Warnings. Messy, emotional sometimes. Even fearful. They are unpredictable. They turn weakness into strength. They do not give up. They are dangerous, the words repeated, again and again across the years. To Erix, it sounded exaggerated. Every young species built myths around itself. Every small conflict turned into a legend. Fear spread easily across the stars. Reality was usually simpler. Humans were still new to space. Their technology was basic compared to the Coalition's. They had not even traveled far beyond their own moon. Their weapons were primitive. Their ships were slow, so how could they be a threat? It did not make sense. One of his officers stepped closer. Commander, the Council is requesting final confirmation. They want your assessment. Erix nodded slowly. Assessment. He already knew what he would say still. He looked at the files one more time. Another report opened. It showed a past incident. A small trading empire had tried to pressure Earth for resources years ago. Nothing major, just threats and blockades. They expected humans to surrender quickly instead. The humans had done something strange. They had not acted as one government. They had not followed a clear chain of command. Different regions reacted differently. Some tried diplomacy. Some prepared defenses. Some built new technology overnight. Civilian groups volunteered to help their soldiers. Scientists worked without sleep. Even people with no training joined to support each other. The trading empire had written, confused. They do not collapse under stress. They become stronger. Erix frowned. That part was unusual. Most species panicked when afraid. Humans did not. Another message played. That this one came from a mining guild that had tried to take control of a human colony. They smile at you while planning resistance. They will treat you as a friend and an enemy at the same time. You cannot predict them. The voice sounded almost frustrated. Erix closed the file. To him, it still sounded like poor strategy from weaker groups, mistakes, bad planning, nothing more. The Coalition was different. The Coalition had thousands of worlds, perfect coordination, powerful fleets, and centuries of experience. They did not make careless errors. That would not be some messy local conflict. This would be controlled. Clean. Quick. He walked closer to the window again. Earth slowly rotated below. He could see lights on the dark side of the planet, millions of tiny sparks where cities were alive. So many lives, so many individuals. Another strange thing about humans. Their population was huge, most intelligent. Species stabilized their numbers. Humans kept growing, building, expanding. They were always moving, always changing. Even their history records showed constant conflict, wars, revolutions, disasters, yet they survived everything. Erix tried to understand it. How could a species fight itself so often and still stand? Usually, such chaos destroyed civilizations, but humans were still here, still advancing, still sending signals. It was stubborn. Yes, that was the right word. Stubborn. A junior analyst approached him carefully. Commander, permission to speak. Granted, we have finished translating more of their broadcasts. They are not aware of us yet. Most of their communication is entertainment, trade, and arguments. Arguments? Erix asked. Yes, they debate everything. Politics, science, culture. Even small issues become loud disputes. Erix almost smiled. So this was the species the galaxy feared. A world full of noisy arguments. He shook his head. Fear had clearly grown larger than the truth. Thank you, he said. Continue monitoring. The analyst left. Erix returned to the central table and activated the final document, the Coalition Council's directive. It was simple. Earth had valuable resources, water, rare elements, biological materials. Its position was strategically useful. Bringing it under Coalition control would benefit everyone. The plan was straightforward. Arrive, quietly. Disable their satellites. Block communications, demonstrate superior power, force. Negotiation. No unnecessary violence. Humans would understand resistance was pointless. Most species did. When faced with overwhelming strength, surrender was logical. And logic always won. At least, that was what the coalition believed. Eric's believed it too. He had seen dozens of first contacts like this. None had failed. Why would this one be different? Still, those old recordings echoed in his mind. They are not like us. They keep fighting. Do not underestimate them. For a moment, a small feeling of doubt appeared, but he pushed it away. Those civilizations were smaller, emotional, disorganized. The coalition was not professional. Strategy would prevent chaos. Professional planning would prevent surprises. Humans were just another young species. Nothing more. He straightened his posture and spoke to the room. Prepare the fleet for approach. To maintain stealth until we reach high orbit. No aggressive moves unless ordered. Officers responded immediately. Yes, Commander. Yes, sir. The ship began to move. Engines glowing softly. Through the window. Earth grew slightly larger. Still calm, still beautiful. Clouds drifting slowly over oceans. No sign that history was about to change. Eric's watched the planet and felt almost relaxed. Soon this mission would be over. A simple show of strength, a short negotiation. Another world added to the coalition, and all those dramatic warnings would finally be proven wrong. He folded his hands behind his back and said quietly to himself, "They are only human." The ship continued forward, silent and confident, carrying with it the belief that logic was stronger than emotion. None of them realized that this quiet, harmless-looking world was already full of people who never followed logic when their home was threatened. None of them understood that sometimes the most dangerous species was not the strongest one. Sometimes it was the one that simply refused to give up. The plan looked perfect on paper. For months, the coalition's best strategists had studied Earth from a distance. They had watched human satellites move around the planet. They had listened to their signals, their internet traffic, their military communications, their news broadcasts. Every piece of data was collected and analyzed. To the coalition, humans looked simple. Their technology was scattered and unorganized. Different countries used different systems. Their governments did not fully trust each other. Their armies were divided. Their languages were different. Their politics were messy. To the coalition officers, this was good news. A divided species was easy to control. If you cut off their communication, they would panic. If you showed superior weapons, they would surrender. That was how most young civilizations behaved. Fear always broke them. So the operation was designed to be quick and clean. No long war, no heavy destruction. Just pressure, enough to make humans accept defeat without fighting. Commander Eric's stood in the command room as the fleet reached high orbit above Earth. The planet looked the same as before, blue, quiet, harmless. White clouds moved slowly like soft smoke. Nothing about it suggested danger. All ships in position, an officer reported. Signal interference ready. Satellite lock acquired. Everything was smooth. Eric's nodded. Begin Phase 1. At once, invisible waves spread from the coalition ships. Human satellites blinked out one by one. Navigation systems failed. Military radars went dark. Communication networks filled with static across the planet. Thousands of screens suddenly lost signal. Air traffic control rooms froze. Military bases lost contact with their commanders. Television broadcasts stopped mid-sentence for a moment. The world went silent. Eric's watched the data streams carefully. This is where they panic. One officer said quietly. Usually, this was the breaking point. Most species depended completely on their networks. When those networks collapsed, chaos followed. But the response from Earth was strange. Instead of one big collapse, thousands of small reactions appeared, like sparks. Commander and analyst said, confused. They are not shutting down. Activity is increasing. Eric's asked. Yes. Signals everywhere. More than before. That didn't make sense. He walked closer to the screen. Human cities were lighting up with new transmissions, not from satellites, from the ground. Short-range radios, local networks, old, wired systems. Even old technology the coalition considered outdated. They're switching methods, the analyst said. They're finding alternatives. Eric's frowned. Most civilizations relied only on modern systems. Humans were using everything they had, even old tools. It was messy, but it worked. Within minutes, emergency services were using backup radios. Police set up manual checkpoints. Hospitals switched to generators. Airports used visual signals instead of automated control. It wasn't perfect, but it wasn't chaos either. It was adaptation. Interesting, Eric muttered. Still, this was only the first step. Proceed to Phase 2. He ordered. Several coalition ships moved lower into the atmosphere. They didn't attack. They simply appeared. Huge metallic vessels floating in the sky, blocking sunlight, large enough for entire cities to see them. A clear message: we are stronger. "Do not resist." On many worlds, this sight alone forced surrender, but on Earth, something unexpected happened again. The humans did not respond with one voice. There was no single government message, no global surrender done. Instead, thousands of different reactions happened at the same time. Some cities broadcast .com announcements. Military bases went into lockdown. Some leaders tried to contact the ships. Some people simply recorded videos and posted them online. "Look at this," an officer said, pointing to another feed. Groups of civilians were gathering, not to riot, but to organize. Volunteers were helping hospitals. Engineers were discussing how to protect power stations. Programmers were typing furiously at computers. Teenagers, old people, workers, students, everyone seemed to be doing something. No one waited for orders. It confused the coalition officers. "Where is their central command?" one asked. "We can't find one," the analyst replied. "They're acting independently." "That's inefficient," another officer said. But Eric's wasn't so sure anymore. Independent meant unpredictable. And unpredictable was dangerous. More reports came in. Human hackers were trying to break the signal jammers. Private companies were launching small rockets with new communication devices. Local police were sharing information with the military. Even rival countries were exchanging data. Countries that had hated each other for years were suddenly cooperating. Would they trust each other so quickly? An officer asked. Eric didn't answer because he didn't know. Most species held grudges during crisis. Humans were doing the opposite. They were putting aside old fights for survival. Then something even stranger that happened. The civilian factories began changing their production. Car factories stopped making cars and started making equipment. Electronics companies built emergency RADIOS 3D printers produced spare parts for weapons and drones. Regular people were turning everyday tools into defenses. Mining lasers were modified into weapons. Construction drones were turned into scouts. Even hobbyists in their homes were building small machines. They're weaponizing civilian tech, the analyst said in shock. "That's not standard behavior." "No," Eric said slowly. "It's not. On most worlds, only the military fought here. Everyone was helping. It was like the entire planet had become one giant workshop by the end of the first day. Earth looked nothing like a frightened world. It looked awake, busy, determined. Eryx felt a small chill. This was not how it was supposed to go. He had expected surrender requests. Instead, he saw problem solving. He had expected fear. Instead, he saw focus. He watched a live human broadcast, a woman speaking calmly into a camera. "We don't know who they are yet," she said, "but stay together, help your neighbors, share resources. We've survived worse before." No screaming, no hopelessness. Just quiet, determination. Another feed showed doctors preparing extra beds. Another, it showed engineers drawing plans on whiteboards. Another showed soldiers training civilians how to use basic equipment. Was like the entire species had practiced for disaster their whole lives. "Commander," an officer said softly, "they're not reacting like prey." Eric didn't reply. Because he was thinking the same thing. Prey scattered, prey hid, prey surrendered. Humans did none of those things. They adapted faster than any model predicted. They did it without waiting for permission, without a single leader. Like millions of small minds working together at once. It was chaotic, but strangely effective for the first time. Eric opened the old warning files again. He replayed one message. "They don't break the way you expect. Every time you think they're finished, they find another way to fight." He watched Earth below. New signals appearing every second. New plans forming. New resistance growing. A simple, bloodless mission was slowly becoming complicated, very complicated, and deep inside. A quiet thought began to grow in his mind. Maybe the galaxy hadn't exaggerated. Maybe the mistake wasn't underestimating human weapons. Maybe the mistake was underestimating humans themselves. By the third day, it became clear that this mission would not be simple. Commander Eric stood silently in the observation deck of the lead coalition ship, staring at Earth below. The planet no longer looked quiet and fragile. From space he could see flashes of activity everywhere. Cities were lit, roads were crowded, and communications signals buzzed faster than ever. Humans were not hiding. They were not surrendering. They were fighting back, but not in the way the coalition expected. When the fleet first entered orbit, Eric had assumed the humans would panic. Most species, when faced with overwhelming force, froze or fled. Some tried to negotiate quickly. Some destroyed what they could before surrendering, but humans were different. They were reacting with speed and intelligence, but more than that, with courage that defied expectation. It started with small attacks. Civilians modified ordinary machines to serve new purposes. Engineers converted mining drones into reconnaissance units. Workshops that normally produced household tools suddenly started producing weapons and defensive devices. Even teenagers and hobbyists with 3D printers were contributing, making parts for drones and communication devices. Their actions were chaotic, yes, but coordinated in a way that surprised the coalition. There was no central command, no single leader dictating strategy, yet the responses were immediate and effective. Coalition soldiers in orbit watched in disbelief as human drones, built from scrap and civilian tools, harassed their landing crafts. They were too small to do major damage, yet they caused enough confusion to slow down operations. Meanwhile, software engineers on Earth found ways to infiltrate coalition systems. They uploaded viruses and glitches that disrupted navigation, communications, and surveillance. The fleet's high-tech weapons sometimes malfunctioned in ways that no simulation had predicted. Every time the coalition adapted, humans adapted faster. Eric leaned over the main display, scanning the reports. "They're everywhere," an officer said. "Not just military, civilians, volunteers, scientists, even children are contributing in some way." "Impossible," Eric murmured. "They shouldn't be able to organize like this without central command." That was the most unnerving part. Humans were acting as if they were connected by an invisible network of understanding, improvising and coordinating without anyone telling them what to do. Streets were blocked and organized with barricades. Hospitals were operating at full capacity despite heavy damage. And communities were helping each other recover from small attacks that had destroyed power stations and communications hubs. Then the reports started mentioning something stranger. Humans were risking their own lives to help others, even those in danger zones targeted by the coalition. Soldiers found themselves treated with medical care by humans who had no obligation to do so. Civilians helped coalition prisoners trapped in damaged buildings. People ran toward danger to rescue others. The coalition was used to species who acted solely in their self-interest. This was something entirely new. Eric realized the meaning of the old warnings he had ignored. The transmissions had said humans were dangerous not because of weapons or technology, but because of their spirit. They were unpredictable because they cared about each other in ways that didn't make sense to the rest of the galaxy. Fear would not make them submit, threats would not make them stop, pain would not make them surrender, and that made them nearly impossible to control. Coalition leaders had assumed humans would panic in the face of superior technology. They had assumed humans would fall into predictable patterns, but humans didn't follow patterns. They followed determination. They fought even when logic told them they should give up. They adapted even when all odds seemed against them. Eric watched the live feeds of human cities and battle zones. Small teams of soldiers worked with civilian volunteers to reinforce weak points. Engineers reprogrammed captured machines to defend their communities. Hackers in basements and bedrooms kept coalition systems busy with fake signals and traps. Entire regions were improvising new strategies in real time, sometimes conflicting with each other, but still slowing down the invading fleet. Even the psychological impact was unexpected. Coalition soldiers reported that humans did not retreat when afraid. They smiled in the face of danger. They taunted and distracted with humor and clever tricks. They made coalition troops hesitate, unsure how to respond to actions that seemed reckless yet effective. It was as if the humans were not bound by the same rules the galaxy expected all species to follow. Eric leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. This was no longer a simple mission. It had turned into something he had never faced before. He reviewed the warnings again. They don't break the way you expect. Every time you think they're finished, they find another way to fight, one of the messages had said. And now he understood. Humans didn't need orders. They didn't need a single leader. They didn't even need advanced weapons. What they had was persistence, intelligence, courage, and a strange instinct for survival. Reports of human resistance kept pouring in. Small teams sabotaged supply depots. Civilians guided soldiers through tricky terrain. Neighborhoods became self-contained fortresses, where families worked together to repair damage and protect each other. When one area fell under attack, another rose to take its place. It was relentless. It was exhausting, and it was working. Coalition officers tried to predict human behavior, but their models failed. Every time a plan worked in simulations, real humans reacted differently. Sometimes they used strategy that seemed illogical, but which led to results better than predicted. Sometimes they acted emotionally, but with precision. Every human was capable of both thought and feeling, and they used both in ways no algorithm could anticipate. The psychological effect on the fleet was noticeable. Soldiers began to report frustration and doubt. Officers questioned strategies that had worked on dozens of other worlds. The confidence that had carried the coalition to so many victories was beginning to erode. Humans were not just resisting, they were teaching the invaders that their expectations were wrong. Eric felt a mixture of fear and admiration. He had trained for every type of engagement, every species he had encountered, every form of resistance, yet nothing prepared him for humans. He realized that the galaxy had not exaggerated when it warned about them. It had only failed to explain why humans were so dangerous. It was not about their weapons. It was about their ability to endure, adapt, and fight together. Even more disturbing, humans seemed to grow stronger as the fight continued. The longer the coalition tried to control them, the more humans organized. Every attack, every disruption, only made them more determined. It was as if the planet itself was alive with resistance, and the people were the lifeblood that kept it moving. By the end of the third day, The coalition fleet had achieved none of its objectives. Satellites were disrupted temporarily, but humans quickly repaired or replaced them. Ground defenses were not subdued. In fact, they had strengthened. Humans were no longer simply defending, they were actively counterattacking. Small, improvised weapons were targeting supply lines. Hackers were creating false signals to confuse the invaders. Teams of humans moved unpredictably, striking where the coalition least expected. Eric's knew something critical. This was not a battle of machines or weapons. It was a battle of spirit. And in spirit, humans were unmatched. They did not fight for glory. They did not fight for honor. They fought for each other, for their homes, for survival. That made them impossible to predict. That made them impossible to conquer. He leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes for a moment. The warnings echoed in his mind again. They are unpredictable. They will not surrender. They will endure until you break. And now he understood. Humans were endurance incarnate. No amount of force, no display of power, no intimidation could make them give up if they decided to survive. Reports kept coming, each one more astonishing than the last. Civilian volunteers ran into dangerous zones to rescue the wounded. Engineers rebuilt damaged equipment while under fire. Children learned to navigate signals and systems to assist adults. Entire cities were improvising complex strategies in ways the coalition could barely comprehend. ERYX finally understood the truth. The galaxy feared humans not because they were the strongest or the fastest, but because they were impossible to predict and impossible to defeat in the way the universe expected. No battle plan, no simulation, no logic could fully account for their persistence. The third day ended with no clear winner. The coalition fleet had caused damage, but it had not broken the humans. Instead, it had revealed a new truth. Humans would not just survive, they would fight back in ways no one had ever imagined. They had turned chaos into advantage, fear into determination, and randomness into strategy. And for the first time, Commander Eric's realized that the galaxy had been right to warn everyone about humans. The danger was not in their weapons or their numbers, it was in their spirit. And that spirit, once awakened, could not be stopped. This was the moment when Eric's began to doubt. Not just the mission, but everything he believed about conquest. Humans were no ordinary species. They were something entirely different. Something the coalition had never encountered before. Something that would make history remember the day they tried to control a species that refused to be controlled, and that was only the beginning. Asterisk. The battle had already lasted longer than Commander Eric's or anyone in the coalition had anticipated. What was supposed to be a swift, clean mission had turned into a grinding, exhausting struggle. From orbit, Eric's watched the planet below and realized something that made him uneasy. Earth was no longer just a target. It had become a living, breathing entity of resistance. Every city, every town, every small group of humans was part of the defense. And the more the coalition tried to dominate them, the stronger they became. The operation had started with precise goals. Take control of communications, disable satellites, show overwhelming presence, and force humans into surrender. That was the standard strategy. Every previous mission with younger civilizations had followed this plan and worked perfectly. But humans didn't follow the rules. They didn't panic. They didn't collapse. They didn't run. Instead, they adapted. They improvised. They fought back with everything they had, even when it seemed hopeless. Coalition analysts were frantically running simulations to predict human responses. Every model failed. Every prediction was wrong. They tried using logic, calculate fear, calculate surrender thresholds, calculate the cost of resistance. But humans ignored all of it. They did not act rationally in the way the coalition expected. They acted emotionally, courageously. Every time the fleet secured one area, humans rebuilt defenses elsewhere. Every time the coalition blocked one communication channel, humans found another. Every attempt to intimidate them seemed only to strengthen their resolve. Reports kept flooding in. Small teams of humans were sabotaging supply depots in ways the fleet couldn't anticipate. Civilians were assisting soldiers in traps, guiding them through damaged areas. Even children and elderly citizens were involved, finding ways to help in whatever small but meaningful ways they could. Entire cities were working together like finely tuned networks, despite there being no central command. Humans were making decisions on their own. Yet somehow it all worked as a whole. The coalition's advanced technology had proved useless in many cases. High-tech weapons were disrupted by improvised human devices. Hackers on Earth were constantly infiltrating their systems, creating false signals, breaking satellite communications, and even redirecting some weapon systems. Small human teams, often armed with nothing more than civilian tools, were able to delay or damage coalition operations. The more the coalition attacked, the more humans adapted, learning from every strike. Eric's realized the shocking truth. The humans' greatest strength was not technology. It was endurance. It was persistence. It was courage. Even when facing overwhelming odds, they refused to quit. They did not fight for glory. They did not fight for territory. They fought for survival and for each other. That made them impossible to conquer in the way the galaxy had understood conquest. On most planets, logic ruled. You showed strength, and species calculated the cost and surrendered. Humans didn't calculate the cost in the same way. They calculated the value of survival, cooperation, and hope, and that value was infinite. Coalition soldiers in orbit began reporting something unusual. Humans were treating wounded soldiers, both their own and coalition prisoners. They were risking lives to save people who had no obligation to them. Civilians went back into dangerous areas to rescue neighbors. Engineers repaired broken infrastructure under fire. Medical teams worked tirelessly, even under extreme conditions. These were not organized military strategies. They were acts of compassion, and that compassion made humans unpredictable. Eric's watched reports of small counterattacks. Civilians were converting ordinary tools into weapons. Miners repurposed lasers and drills. Factory machines were producing new parts for vehicles, drones, and communications equipment. Amateur programmers were creating software to disrupt coalition operations. Teenagers were building small drones to deliver messages or monitor enemy movement. Entire neighborhoods became miniature defensive networks. Each human seemed to think independently, yet collectively. They formed a near-perfect adaptive system. The psychological impact on the fleet was becoming apparent. Coalition soldiers were confused and frustrated. Their confidence, which had always been unshakable, was eroding. The humans' unpredictability was causing hesitation and mistakes. Leaders who had conquered worlds with ease were finding themselves outmaneuvered by a species they considered weak and primitive. Eric's reviewed the old warnings once more. They had said humans were dangerous because they were unpredictable, because they never surrendered, because they endured. And now he understood completely. Humans' greatest weapon was their spirit, not their technology. They could not be intimidated, coerced, or broken in ways the galaxy had always assumed were universal. The fleet tried new tactics. They concentrated firepower, launched precision strikes, and tried to disrupt human networks. Every move was countered, delayed, or nullified by humans. Improvised defenses absorbed attacks. Engineers rebuilt systems in hours. Hackers redirected attacks back at the fleet. And yet, humans never gave up, never panicked, never retreated. They just adapted, again and again. Eric's felt a growing sense of fear and respect. He had trained for every type of species, every kind of battle, every kind of rebellion. Nothing had prepared him for this. Humans were not just surviving, they were growing stronger under pressure. Every setback became an opportunity for them to improve. Every loss became a lesson. Every attack was met with innovation. One report stood out. A small group of civilians had used a mix of civilian drones and basic machinery to sabotage a supply convoy. They were completely outnumbered and under fire, yet they succeeded. Their method was clever and unexpected. It would have been considered reckless by any other species, but it worked perfectly. That kind of improvisation, combined with their willingness to risk everything, made them unstoppable. Another report showed cities working together to repair infrastructure. Even when parts of a city were damaged, neighboring towns sent resources, volunteers, and engineers. Human communication was messy, unorganized, yet efficient. They were coordinating without central command, without strategy manuals, without strict leadership. They were acting on instinct, empathy, and determination. Eric's realized the larger truth. This was no longer a simple military campaign. It was a psychological war, and humans were winning. The coalition could not break them because humans did not rely on logic or fear to make decisions. They relied on endurance, cooperation, and willpower. They fought for their lives and for each other, and that made them unpredictable, resilient, and extraordinarily dangerous. As the days dragged on, the fleet's casualties increased. Every small victory required enormous effort. Every attack required careful planning, and yet humans found ways to counteract it. The cost of occupation was growing exponentially. The more the coalition tried to control Earth, the more humans resisted, adapted, and grew stronger. Eric's felt a deep, chilling realization. No matter how advanced a fleet, no matter how precise their technology, no matter how overwhelming their force, humans could endure longer than the coalition could maintain operations. They would not surrender, they would not break, and they would not retreat. The galaxy's warnings were not exaggerations, they were precise, accurate, and terrifying. He looked down at Earth, seeing the lights of cities still burning with activity. People were moving, organizing, helping each other. They were fighting in ways no one could predict. They were learning from every encounter. Every attack only strengthened them. The planet was alive with determination, and the people were the heart of that determination. For the first time in his career, Commander Eric's questioned everything. Not just the mission, but the belief in control, in conquest, in the ability to dominate another species with technology and strategy alone. Humans were different. Humans were not machines to be overridden. They were unpredictable, emotional, intelligent, and resilient. They could not be broken, not by fear, not by force, not by logic. As night fell across Earth, Eric's watched reports continued to stream in. Humans were repairing damage, creating new tools, rescuing each other, and preparing for the next challenge. Even when faced with devastating attacks, they did not lose hope. They did not falter. They adapted, they endured, And in that moment, Eric's understood the truth the galaxy had been warning about for so long. Humans were dangerous not because they were powerful, not because they were fast, not because they had weapons, but because they could not be defeated in the ways the galaxy expected. They would endure, fight, and adapt indefinitely. The fourth day ended, and still the humans resisted. The coalition fleet had inflicted damage, but the humans had not just survived, they had learned, improved, and grown stronger. Every failure the coalition faced only fueled human innovation. Every setback only strengthened their determination. And Commander Eric's knew, with a weight in his chest, that the mission had changed. It was no longer about occupation or control. It was about survival for both sides, but especially for the fleet. Humans had proven something undeniable. You could not conquer them by force alone. You could not break their spirit. You could not predict them. By the end of this phase, the coalition had achieved nothing except the sobering realization that humans were far more formidable than anyone had ever imagined. The warnings were true. The galaxy had underestimated them, and if the coalition continued, the cost would be unbearable. This was the breaking point. Humans were not just fighting, they were enduring, they were unstoppable, they were teaching the galaxy a lesson it would never forget. Asterisk. By the time the final phase of the operation arrived, Commander Eric's and the coalition forces were exhausted. Weeks of engagement had stretched their fleets, drained supplies, and tested their strategies to the limit. What had been designed as a quick, precise mission had become a protracted struggle, unlike anything the coalition had ever faced. Earth below looked much the same as it had at the start: blue oceans, white clouds, and scattered lights across continents, but the calm beauty was deceiving. Beneath that surface, a species had proven itself unstoppable, resilient, and far more dangerous than anyone had predicted. The fleet had suffered losses. Ships had been damaged or destroyed by humans' improvised defenses, clever sabotage, and unpredictable counterattacks. Coalition officers had grown frustrated. They were used to operating with perfect coordination, relying on the predictability of other species to ensure success. But humans had turned predictability into chaos. Every tactic, every maneuver, every plan had been challenged in ways no one could have anticipated. Reports kept coming in from satellites and ground reconnaissance. Civilians and soldiers had formed ad hoc units that worked together seamlessly. The streets and buildings, damaged in earlier skirmishes, were repaired and fortified almost immediately. Engineers adapted civilian technology into defensive and offensive tools. Hackers disrupted communications and even manipulated coalition systems. Every human, from children to elderly, seemed to have a role. Even volunteers with no military training contributed in small but vital ways. Eric's watched as humans moved with determination and purpose, but without a clear central command. They were coordinated, yet chaotic, improvised, yet effective. Every attempt by the coalition to anticipate or control their behavior had failed, and the more humans faced the fleet's attacks, the more ingenious they became. Each response was faster and smarter than the last. Eric's realized the truth that had been whispered in the warnings all along. Humans did not just endure, they evolved under pressure. The psychological impact on coalition forces was profound. Soldiers who had expected submission found themselves facing courage, intelligence, and compassion that they could not predict. Human fighters risked their lives for strangers, rescued wounded soldiers, even some coalition prisoners, and adapted quickly to changing situations. The invaders were no longer simply confronting resistance. They were confronting an entire species unwilling to be broken. As days passed, Eric's began to notice the change in his own crew. Morale was dropping. Confidence, which had been unshakable at the mission's start, was beginning to waver. Officers questioned strategies that had always worked before. Soldiers hesitated when faced with humans who acted unpredictably. Even the most advanced weapons were being undermined by clever human improvisation. The coalition's assumed advantage, technology and organization, was being neutralized by the humans' adaptability and persistence. Communication from the council had become tense. "Commander, report," one message demanded. Eric's hesitated. There was little he could say that would not reflect the truth. The humans were winning not by destroying the fleet, but by outlasting it, outsmarting it, and refusing to surrender. They were exhausting the invaders in every possible way, mentally, emotionally, and strategically. The humans were remarkable in how they combined intellect with emotion. Most species in the galaxy fought with calculated logic. Humans fought with willpower, empathy, and courage. They protected each other, and sometimes even protected enemies who were caught in danger. They adapted quickly to changing circumstances and did not rely on strict military hierarchy. Leaders were respected, but anyone could act independently if needed. Communities became self-sufficient units, capable of repairing damage, producing tools, and defending themselves without waiting for orders. Coalition forces tried everything. They increased firepower, targeted supply lines, attempted more precise attacks, and tried to intimidate the population. Humans met each tactic with an improvised solution. Supply lines were sabotaged by humans in ways the fleet had not considered. Civilians assisted military units. Engineers repaired destroyed infrastructure. Scientists and technicians created new solutions in record time, and each new adaptation seemed faster and smarter than the last. Eric's realized that the humans' greatest strength was endurance. Unlike other species, they did not calculate the cost of resistance in conventional terms. They did not surrender when faced with danger. They did not stop when destruction seemed inevitable. They fought because survival, protection, and cooperation were worth any cost. That determination made them unpredictable and impossible to defeat by normal means. The humans' resilience had a domino effect. Neighboring cities supported each other. Individuals risked their own safety for the greater good. Communities shared knowledge, repaired damage, and protected each other. Children learned skills quickly to assist adults. Elderly citizens contributed wisdom and experience. Everyone had a role, and everyone worked together despite not being told what to do. It was chaotic, yet strangely organized. It was human, yet beyond what the coalition had anticipated. Eric's reviewed another report, showing that humans had turned previous setbacks into new opportunities. A destroyed bridge led to a more creative transport solution. An attacked power plant led to local generators being rigged for wider distribution. Failed attacks by the coalition became lessons for humans to improve their defenses. Every failure of the humans became a learning experience. Every success of the humans became a model for others to copy. The planet was alive with adaptation, and the humans were its heartbeat by this point. It was clear that the coalition had not conquered Earth. They had inflicted damage, yes, but they had not broken the human spirit. In fact, every attempt at control seemed only to strengthen it. They had underestimated a species that refused to be defeated, a species that could endure beyond the expectations of logic and fear. The decision to withdraw came quietly. Officially, it was called a strategic disengagement, but there was no mistaking it for what it truly was: a retreat. Ships slowly disengaged from orbit. The operation that had begun with confidence and arrogance ended with humility and caution. The humans were still standing. They had survived, adapted, and learned, and they had proven that the warnings from other civilizations were accurate. As the fleet left, Earth resumed its rhythms. People returned to rebuilding. Cities repaired infrastructure. Communication networks restored themselves. Scientific communities analyzed the technology that had been captured or studied during the conflict. Everyone was learning. Everyone was preparing for the future. And in the process, humans grew stronger. Commander Eric's filed his final report to the Council. He could not sugarcoat it. He wrote that humans were unpredictable, persistent, and impossible to subdue with conventional strategies. He warned that future attempts to engage them militarily would be costly and likely unsuccessful. He noted that humans did not surrender in the way other species did not calculate cost in the same way, and did not respond predictably to threats. He emphasized that humans were dangerous not because of their technology or numbers, but because of their endurance, intelligence, and spirit. For Eric's, the experience had been humbling. He had learned that logic and technology alone were not enough to dominate every species. Courage, persistence, and adaptability could overcome even the most advanced fleets. The humans had survived not through power, but through determination, cooperation, and willpower. They had turned what the coalition thought was weakness into strength, chaos into organization, and fear into courage. Years later, the coalition would approach Earth again, but not with warships. This time they would approach with diplomats, negotiators, and cautious observation. They had learned that the galaxy's warnings were true. Humans could not be underestimated. They could not be defeated by fear, force, or prediction. They endured, they adapted, and they persisted. As the last fleet disappeared into space, Earth was alive with activity. Cities glowed in the night, engineers repaired, volunteers coordinated, and people celebrated quietly in streets. The humans had not only survived, they had thrived. They had faced an enemy thought to be unstoppable and had come out stronger. Eric's watched silently from the command ship, knowing that the galaxy had learned a hard lesson. Humans were not to be underestimated. They were not just another young species. They were resilient, unpredictable, and impossible to conquer by conventional means. They would endure, and they would teach the galaxy a lesson that would not be forgotten. In the end, the humans had not only survived, they had redefined what it meant to fight, to resist, and to endure. The galaxy had tried to ignore the warnings, had tried to believe humans could be controlled, and had learned the hard way that the warnings were accurate. Humans were unstoppable not because of strength or numbers, but because of something much harder to overcome. Spirit. The fleet moved on, carrying the bitter knowledge that Earth was not just a planet. It was a lesson in persistence, courage, and the unpredictable power of a species that refused to give up. Humans had won, not by destroying the coalition but by outlasting it, outthinking it, and refusing to surrender. The galaxy had been warned, and this time it had finally listened.